Let's just listen to you.
Captain's log, stardate 4721.3. Somewhere in the vast darkness of the universe, a small blue planet continues its lonely journey around an ordinary star. On that planet lives a species that has spent thousands of years asking the same questions. Are we alone? Where did we come from? And perhaps the most fascinating question of all, is the story of our humanity truly complete? Hello everyone, welcome. My name is Victor and this is Never Have I Had the Urge to be an Ancient Alien Theorist. For centuries, human beings have looked up into the night skies searching for answers. Sometimes through religion, sometimes through science, and sometimes through imagination. In the 1960s, television audiences were introduced to a fictional starship exploring the galaxy. A diverse crew of men and women, and even beings from other worlds, working together aboard the starship Enterprise. Its mission? Explore strange new worlds, to seek out new life and new civilizations, to boldly go where no one had gone before. The creator of that vision? Gene Roddenberry. He imagined a future where humanity had moved beyond many of its divisions here on Earth and turned its curiosity towards the stars. At that time, it was science fiction. But science fiction has a strange way of becoming science fact. Devices that once existed only in comic strips, on television screens, and in the movies, from Dick Tracy talking into his wristwatch to handheld communicators, computers, AI voice control systems, and even robots, eventually became everyday technology. And while humanity hasn't built a starship capable of traveling between the stars, our curiosity about the universe hasn't stopped growing. But long before television shows imagined starships exploring the cosmos, human beings were already asking questions about the heavens, questions about the stars, questions about the universe, and questions about ourselves. I was raised in the Catholic faith. From the first grade through the sixth grade, I attended Catholic school in the Bronx, where I was taught the biblical story of creation, that humanity was created in the image of God. It was a belief shared by billions of people around the world. But later, when I entered public school in Forest Hills, Queens, I encountered a very different explanation of our origins: the scientific theory of evolution. According to this idea, humans did not appear suddenly in their present form. Instead, we evolved slowly over millions of years from early hominid ancestors, apes. Two explanations, two very different ways of understanding where we came from. As a kid growing up in New York City, I wasn't spending much time worrying about the origins of humanity. I had other things on my mind: friends, school, girls, life. The question of where we came from simply sat somewhere in the back of my mind, unanswered. But many years later, I would come across something that would bring that question back to the forefront again. And it started with a book. Before there was a television show, before the debates, before the arguments, there was a book. A book that asked a question most people had never seriously considered. What if stories of gods descending from the sky weren't just stories? What if they were something else entirely? In 1968, a Swiss author named Erich von Däniken published a book titled Chariots of the Gods. The book would go on to become an international bestseller. Its premise was simple, but controversial. that many ancient civilizations may have had contact with beings not from this earth, that the gods described in ancient texts could have been misunderstood visitors from the stars, extraterrestrials. The book explored ideas that challenged traditional explanations of history and religion. Ancient carvings that appeared to depict figures wearing what looked like spacesuit helmets, massive stone structures built with a level of precision that seemed difficult to explain and replicate even today. Stories from cultures around the world describing beings who came down from the sky. Now, whether or not someone believes these ideas isn't really the point, because what the book did more than anything else was introduce a question, a different way of looking at the past. For me, it wasn't about immediately believing everything I read. It was about curiosity, about the possibility that maybe, just maybe, there was more to the story of humanity than I had been taught. The book didn't give me answers. It gave me something else. It gave me questions. And sometimes questions are far more powerful than answers. Years later, around 2006 or 2007, I started dating a woman I met while I was working at a nursing home in Raleigh, North Carolina. She was a single mother raising two young boys, 6 and 8. She was a devoted Catholic. Church wasn't something she just did on Sundays. It was a big part of how she lived her life. And she made sure her boys were being raised the same way, faith-centered, structured, grounded in what she believed to be the truth, her truth. By that point, I had already read Chariots of the Gods. The idea had been introduced. The question had been planted. But it was still just that, a question. Then in 2009, a television series premiered on the History Channel that would take those questions and bring them to life in a way I had never seen before. Ancient Aliens. From the very first episode, I was hooked. The show just didn't present ideas, it explored them. Ancient structures, ancient texts, ancient civilizations, all connected by one central question. What if human history wasn't exactly what we thought it was? But inside my home, that show became a problem. My girlfriend didn't like it. She didn't like it one bit, not at all. She didn't want me watching it, and she definitely didn't want her boys watching it either. To her, it wasn't just a television show. It challenged something much deeper. Her beliefs, her faith, her understanding of her worldview and the universe itself. I remember there were times she would get genuinely upset with me for watching Ancient Aliens, calling me things like a devil or a heretic just for watching that show. I would laugh it off, not because I didn't respect her beliefs, but because I started to realize something, not just about her, but about people in general. Some beliefs are held so tightly that even asking questions can feel like a threat. And the more uncomfortable the question, the stronger the reaction. Now, to be fair, she had already made me stop watching things like UFC fights around the boys, and I get that. But somehow, Ancient Aliens, the series, was a real problem. And despite her protest, I kept watching. I kept reading. I kept asking questions because something about it all felt interesting. Not necessarily all true, not necessarily proven, but to me, definitely interesting. That relationship lasted about 12 years. My relationship with Ancient Aliens, well, that one's still going strong. 22 seasons and counting. I guess you could say one relationship eventually came to an end, and the other one just kept me asking questions. What made Ancient Aliens so compelling wasn't just the ideas it explored, It was the people presenting them, different voices, different backgrounds, different way of looking at the same question. For many viewers, especially me, the most recognizable face on the show is Giorgio Tsoukalos. With his unmistakable presence, his hairstyle, and his passionate delivery, he became something of a cultural icon. But beyond that, he has spent years researching and promoting what is known as the ancient astronaut theory. The idea that ancient civilizations may have had contact with advanced beings from somewhere beyond this planet. Long before the television show even existed, that idea had already been introduced to the world by Erich von Däniken. His book laid the foundation. The show simply expanded the conversation. Then there are voices like David Hatcher Childress, an explorer, author, and modern day Indiana Jones who has traveled the world studying ancient ruins and lost civilizations, bringing with him the perspective that maybe ancient people knew more than we give them credit for. But the show doesn't just rely on one type of voice, it brings a wide range of perspectives. Anthropologists, authors, researchers, even religious scholars. People like Dr. Sabina Maguchlio, an American folklorist who studied mythology and cultural traditions. Kathleen McGowan Copens, who explores religious history and ancient narratives. Investigative journalists like Linda Moulton Howe, who approach the subject from a research-driven perspective. And voices like Caroline Corey, who examine the deeper questions about reality and human perception. Each bringing something different to the table, each asking questions about their own point of view. And that really what made the show interesting for me. It wasn't just presenting answers, it was presenting possibilities, a different way of looking at things. Because when you hear the same question asked from multiple perspectives, it starts to make you wonder, not necessarily what to believe, but whether there might be more to the story than we've been told. Maybe that's why ideas like this continue to resonate not only with me, but with millions of people around the world. Because whether it's the exploration of strange new worlds in Star Trek or epic battles between the forces of good and evil in Star Wars, humanity has always imagined a universe far bigger than itself. A universe filled with life, with intelligence, and with possibilities that go beyond our own world. If the ideas presented in Ancient Aliens are going to be taken serious at all, they have to begin with one thing: the evidence, or at the very least, the mysteries, because scattered across the world are structures that continue to raise questions, not because they are impossible, but because they are impressive in ways that are difficult to fully explain. Take, for example, the pyramids of Egypt. The Great Pyramid of Giza is made up of an estimated 2 million stone blocks, some weighing as much as 50 to 80 tons, constructed thousands of years ago, with the level of precision that still amazes engineers today, aligned in ways that correspond with celestial patterns, built without modern machinery. The question isn't whether humans built them. They did. The question is how. Then there's Machu Picchu in Peru, a city in the clouds, built high in the Andes Mountains. Massive stones cut and fitted together so precisely that even today a blade of grass cannot easily fit between them. No mortar, no modern tools, and somehow the structures have stood the test of time for centuries. In England, there's Stonehenge, enormous stones, some transported from miles away, weighing up to 25 tons, arranged in a circular formation with alignments that correspond to the movements of the sun during the solstices. Again, not impossible, but definitely remarkable. And then there is a site that may be one of the most intriguing of them all, Göbekli Tepe in modern-day Turkey, estimated to be over 11,000 years old. That is the smoking gun for many theorists because it predates what we thought was possible. Older than Stonehenge, older than the pyramids, built before we traditionally believed to be the rise of organized agriculture. Massive stone pillars carved with detailed images of animals and strange beings, arranged in what appears to be a ceremonial or ritualistic layout, a structure that suggests early humans were capable of far more than we once believed. And discoveries like this have forced historians to reconsider part of the human timeline, because every time something new is uncovered or dug up, it raises the same question. How much do we really know about our past? From Egypt to Peru, to England to Turkey, the deeper you dig into ancient civilizations, the more questions begin to appear. Not necessarily answers, but questions. And sometimes those questions lead people to reconsider possibilities that go beyond traditional explanations. As if massive stone structures weren't enough to raise questions, there are also things like maps. Maps that, for some, suggest that ancient knowledge may have been far more advanced than we realize. One of the most discussed examples is a map created in the early 16th century by an Ottoman named Piri Reis. Known today as the Piri Reis map, it was drawn in 1513. The map shows parts of Europe, Africa, and South America with surprising accuracy for its time. But what has drawn the most attention is what appears at the bottom of the map, a landmass that some believe resembles Antarctica. What makes this particularly intriguing is that Antarctica wasn't officially discovered until the early 19th century, more than 300 years after the map was created. Even more curious, some interpretations suggest that the coastline shown resembles Antarctica without its modern ice day cover. Now, many historians argue that what appears to be Antarctica is more likely a distorted representation of South America. And that may well be the case. But even if it is just South America, the fact that the accuracy of the longitude is supposedly impossible for the 1500s. But the mystery surrounding the map continues to be part of a larger question. Where did ancient map makers get their information? Because Piri Reis himself wrote that his map was compiled from much older sources that he claimed dated back to ancient times, possibly even as far back as the era of Alexander the Great. If that's true, then it raises another possibility that fragments of ancient knowledge may have survived, passed down from civilization to civilization, while other parts were lost. And if knowledge can be passed down, it can also be lost, forgotten, destroyed. Beyond the structures, beyond the maps, there are also stories, ancient texts and myths, legends passed down through generations, stories from civilizations that existed thousands of years apart, with no known contact with one another. And yet, they often describe something strikingly similar: beings coming down from the sky. In ancient Mesopotamian texts, there are references to entities known as the Anunnaki, figures described as powerful beings who descended from the heavens and interacted with early humanity. In ancient Hindu writings, there are accounts of flying machines called vimanas, vehicles said to move through the sky with incredible speed, carrying gods across great distances. In Mesoamerican cultures, including the Maya and the Aztecs, there are stories of gods who came from above, bringing knowledge, guidance, and in some cases, civilization itself. And even with the Bible, In the book of Genesis, there is a passage that speaks of the Nephilim, beings described as giants who once walked our earth. Now, these stories are often interpreted as mythology, symbolic, spiritual, cultural attempts to explain the unknown, and that may very well be true. But when similar themes appear across civilizations separated by oceans and centuries, it raises an interesting question. Why? Why do so many cultures describe beings descending from the sky? Were these simply stories created by ancient people trying to make sense of the world around them? Or could they be echoes of events we no longer fully understand? Not proof, not certainty, but possibility. Because when you begin to look at the ancient texts from around the world, you start to see a pattern. And patterns have a way of making people ask questions. If history is built on knowledge, what happens when the knowledge disappears? Because throughout human history, it hasn't just been preserved, it also has been lost. One of the most famous examples of this is the Library of Alexandria. At its height, it was one of the greatest centers of knowledge in the ancient world, a place where scholars gathered from across civilization to study and exchange ideas. Inside its walls were thousands of scrolls covering every subject like astronomy, mathematics, philosophy, geography, and the recorded histories of ancient cultures. But at some point in history, the library was destroyed. Exactly how it happened is still debated, but what is certain is this: when it was gone, so was the knowledge it contained. Entire works disappeared, ideas, discovery, histories lost to time. And once knowledge is gone, it doesn't always come back. Something similar happened centuries later in the Americas. When Spanish conquistadors arrived in Central America, they encountered the Maya, a civilization with a deep understanding of astronomy, mathematics, and written language. Their knowledge was recorded in folded books known as codices, books that documented their history, their beliefs, their understanding of the cosmos. But in 1562, a Spanish bishop named Diego de Landa ordered many of the books to be burned. He believed they contained dangerous ideas, pagan beliefs, things that did not align with his understanding of truth. According to historical accounts, thousands of these manuscripts were destroyed. Today, only a handful remain. Thousands of years of knowledge reduced to just a few surviving fragments. When books are burned, when libraries are destroyed, when cultures are conquered, history doesn't just simply disappear. It becomes incomplete. And maybe that's something we don't always consider. Not that history is wrong, but that part of it may be missing. Lost somewhere between civilizations, between generations, between what was recorded and what survived. After everything we've explored, the structure, the maps, the ancient texts, the lost knowledge, it's easy to think these questions belong only to the past. But they don't. Because even today, we're still searching. Not through myth, not through legend, but through science. Organizations like NASA have spent decades studying the universe, looking beyond our planet for signs of life. Using powerful instruments like the Kepler Space Telescope and the James Webb Telescope, scientists have discovered thousands of planets orbiting distant stars. Planets far beyond our solar system, known as exoplanets. Many of these planets exist in what scientists call the habitable zone, or Goldilocks zone, the region around the star where conditions may allow liquid water to exist. And where there is water, there is at least the possibility of life. Scientists now estimate there may be billions of potentially habitable planets in our galaxy alone. Billions. Which brings us back to a question humanity has been asking for centuries. If life can exist here, could it exist somewhere else? And if it does, has it always remained out there among the stars? Or is it possible that at some point in the distant past, it came here? I've never had the urge to become an ancient alien theorist, but I've had the urge to ask questions about where we come from and about where we've been taught and about what may still not be fully understood. Because the deeper you look into our past, the more complex it becomes. And if history has taught us anything, it's that what we believe to be true today has a way of changing tomorrow. And maybe that's where all of this really leads. Not to answers, but to acceptance. Because acceptance is truly the key. Because even with as much as we've learned about the world, about our history, and even about the universe, there is still so much more we don't know. Maybe the truth about our origins is exactly what we've been taught. Maybe it's something more, or maybe it's something we haven't discovered yet. Because the deeper we dig into our past, the more we realize we're still searching. So if this episode made you think or question something you've always believed, then share it with someone who's not afraid to ask those same questions. And if you've ever had the urge to look deeper into the unknown, I'd love to hear your story. And remember, behind every want, there lies an urge. And behind every urge, there's a need. Until next time, thanks for joining me on Never Have I Had the Urge. This episode was written and produced by me, your host, Victor Jimenez.